Hi everyone, myself Dr. P. Soumya, working as an assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry, Institute of Aeronautical Engineering. In this session, I'm going to discuss about conservation of biodiversity. In this session, I'm going to cover the topics. What is the definition of biodiversity, and introduction to the biodiversity conservation, importance of biodiversity conservation, threats to biodiversity, conservation strategies, and international conservation efforts, benefits of biodiversity conservation, challenges in biodiversity conservation, and conclusion. So first we should know what is biodiversity. Biodiversity or biological diversity, it refers to the range of life forms present on the earth. So biodiversity, also known as biological diversity, it refers to the range of life forms on the earth. So the biosphere which is present on earth, this is comprises of complex collection of organisms known as biodiversity. The biosphere comprises of complex collection of innumerable organisms known as biodiversity. So this biosphere constitutes a vital life support for the survival of human race. So this biosphere constitutes the vital life support for the survival of human beings. So this includes millions of plants, animals and microorganisms, and also genes of plants, animals and microorganisms. So these the genes they contain and the ecosystems of which they are a part. So this is about biodiversity definition. So here this biodiversity, also known as biological diversity, it refers to the range of life forms present on the earth. So the biosphere comprises of a complex collection of innumerable organisms known as biodiversity. So it includes millions of plants, millions of animals and millions of microorganisms and millions of genes. So this is biodiversity. So here this is introduction to conservation of biodiversity. Why we need a conservation of biodiversity? So here biodiversity refers to the variety of life. We know that this biodiversity refers to the variety of life forms on the earth and ecological processes that sustain it. So we have the threats to biodiversity. So these are factors that contribute to the loss and degradation of species, ecosystems and genetic diversity. Threats to biodiversity means these are the factors that contribute to the loss or degradation of species, ecosystems, genetic diversity. So by understanding and addressing these threats, it is very crucial for conserving biodiversity and maintaining the balance of our ecosystem. So this is introduction about conservation of biodiversity. So we know that biodiversity means it is a variety of life forms present on earth, including plants, animals and also microorganisms. The conservation of biodiversity involves protecting and preserving. Conservation of biodiversity, it involves protecting as well as preserving the different species and their habitats. Conservation of biodiversity, it involves protecting and preserving of the different species and their habitats. So biodiversity, it is a crucial for maintaining the balance of ecosystem and providing various ecosystem services. So biodiversity, it is crucial for maintaining the balance of our ecosystem and providing various ecosystem services. So what is conservation of biodiversity means? It involves protecting or preserving the different species and their habitats. So importance of biodiversity conservation. Biodiversity provides essential ecosystem services such as air, water purification, soil fertility and climate regulation. So biodiversity, it provides essential ecosystem services. Biodiversity provides essential ecosystem services such as air and water purification, soil fertility and pollination and climate regulation. So conservation of biodiversity helps in discovery of new medicines and potential sources of food and other resources. So conservation of biodiversity helps in discovery of new medicines and potential source of food and other resources. Biodiversity enhances the resilience of ecosystems, making them more resistant to disturbances and climate change. This biodiversity enhances the resilience of ecosystems and making them more resistant to the disturbances as well as climate change. So this is the importance of biodiversity conservation. So we know that threats to biodiversity includes habitat loss and fragmentation, climate change, pollution, invasive species, overexploitation, agricultural expansion, deforestation, overpopulation and urbanization, disease outbreaks are the reasons. These are the threats to the biodiversity. These are threats to the biodiversity. The habitat loss and fragmentation. So this is due to the deforestation, urbanization and also agricultural expansion. So these three are major threats to the biodiversity. Habitat loss and fragmentation. So this happens due to deforestation, urbanization and agriculture, and these are major threats to the biodiversity. And also pollution, including air pollution, water pollution. So these affects biodiversity by contaminating habitats and reducing species population. So because of the contamination, this may lead to the reducing species population. Pollution, including air pollution, water pollution, this affects biodiversity by contaminating habitats and also reducing species populations. So next one is invasive species. This can disrupt ecosystems and this outcompete native species, this leading to the biodiversity loss. Invasive species, this can disrupt ecosystems and outcompete native species, leading to biodiversity loss. So these are the threats to the biodiversity. And conservation strategies are, first one is protected areas. Conservation. So to conserve the biodiversity, we have to follow the conservation strategies. First strategy is protected areas. So establishing protected areas as national parks, nature reserves helps safeguard biodiversity and also habitats. So conservation strategy, first strategy is protected areas, establishing protected areas such as national parks and nature reserves. So this national parks and nature reserves helps safeguard biodiversity and also habitats. So protected areas provides safe havens for endangered species and allow for the recovery of population. These protected areas provide safe havens for endangered species and also allow for the recovery of populations of endangered species. So effective management and also enforcement of regulations within protected areas are crucial for biodiversity conservation. Effective management and enforcement of regulations within protected areas are crucial for biodiversity conservation. So this is about protected areas conservation strategy. Second one is sustainable land use. So promoting sustainable land use practices such as agroforestry and organic farming helps preserve biodiversity. So promoting sustainable land use practices such as agroforestry or organic farming. So this will helps preserve the biodiversity. Sustainable land use, it reduces the soil erosion, water pollution, habitat destruction. So by using agroforestry and organic farming, so this sustainable land use reduces soil erosion, water pollution and also habitat destruction. So encouraging responsible logging and mining practices. So this minimizes the negative impacts on biodiversity. So here encouraging responsible logging and mining practices. So here encouraging responsible logging and mining processes minimizes the negative impacts on the biodiversity. So this is about sustainable land use. So by using sustainable land use practices such as agroforestry and organic farming, we can reduce the soil erosion, water pollution and habitat destruction. And also increasing responsible logging and also mining, it can minimize the negative impacts on biodiversity. Next conservation strategy is wildlife conservation. Wildlife conservation. So implementing measures to combat illegal wildlife trade and poaching is essential for biodiversity conservation. Implementing measures to combat illegal wildlife trade. So we have to reduce the illegal wildlife trade and also poaching is essential for biodiversity conservation. So conservation breeding and reintroduction programs help restore endangered species populations. Conservation breeding and also reintroduction programs, this may help to restore the endangered species population. And also wildlife corridors facilitate the movement of species between fragmented habitats and promoting genetic diversity. So here wildlife corridors facilitate the movement of species between fragmented habitats and promoting genetic diversity. Next strategy is ecosystem restoration. Ecosystem restoration, restoring degraded ecosystems through reforestation, wetland restoration and coral reef rehabilitation enhances biodiversity. So ecosystem restoration, so it will restoring degraded ecosystems. It can by using ecosystem restoration, we can restore degraded ecosystems through reforestation, wetland restoration, and coral reef rehabilitation, and this will enhance the biodiversity of our ecosystem. So this ecosystem restoration, it includes it will restore the degraded ecosystem through restoration, wetland restoration, reforestation and coral reef rehabilitation processes. So here ecological restoration aims to recreate functional ecosystems benefiting both wildlife and human communities. Ecological restoration, this aims to recreate functional ecosystems and this will benefit both wildlife as well as human communities. So it involving local communities in restoration efforts, it will promote sustainable practices and strengthens conservation outcomes. So if we see this diagram, so first one is bad land management, second one is ecosystem restoration diagram. If we see bad land management, in this deforestation is taking place. This deforestation, this is used for the agriculture expansion and industrial expansion. Industrial and agriculture, it is taking place more and more, and because of overgrazing, so loss of biodiversity taking place because of over exploitation of natural resources. So the like overgrazing and industrial and agriculture in the production. So the loss of biodiversity taking place after that. Climate change is taking place from soil carbon. So after that, loss of livelihood takes place. So this is bad land management. So the agriculture, for the agriculture expansion and industrial expansion, so we are doing deforestation and overgrazing. So because of this, loss of biodiversity is taking place. So because of loss of biodiversity, climate change is occurring. So as climate change is occurring, loss of livelihoods is taking place. This is bad land management. So next is ecosystem restoration. So this is a conservation strategy. So for that we are doing erosion control and soil restoration is taking place. After that, we are doing replanting and intact ecosystems. After that, sustainable livelihoods are occurring, and it revert climate change. Because of ecosystem restoration, climate change is reversed back to its original state. So this is about ecosystem restoration. So this is taking place by erosion control, soil restoration and replanting. So this is about ecosystem restoration technique. So conservation strategies, another strategy is education and awareness from the to the people is very important for conservation of biodiversity. So educating the public about the importance of biodiversity and its conservation fosters a sense of responsibility. So this promoting ecotourism and nature-based activities generates support for conservation efforts. So educating the people, it is very important to conserve the biodiversity, and this will promoting ecotourism and nature-based activities generate support for conservation efforts. So this raising awareness about sustainable consumption and reducing waste protect helps to protect the biodiversity. So we have to raise the awareness about sustainable consumption and also reducing waste. This will help to the protection of biodiversity, conservation of biodiversity. So this is the another strategy, that is education and awareness. So international conservation efforts and convention on biological diversity. So this is a convention on biological diversity. So the Convention on Biological Diversity (CBD), it is an international treaty aimed at conserving biodiversity. That aim of this Convention on Biological Diversity is conserving biodiversity. This CBD promotes sustainable use of biodiversity, fair sharing of genetic resources, and access to benefit sharing. And the CBD parties to the CBD, the parties to the CBD collaborate on conservation strategies, research and capacity building initiatives. So this is about the Convention on Biological Diversity. The main aim of Convention on Biological Diversity is conserving biodiversity. So this promotes the sustainable use of biodiversity and fair sharing of genetic resources and access of benefit of sharing. So here, international conservation efforts, red list of threatened species. International conservation efforts, red list of threatened species. So the IUCN red list, red list of threatened species assesses the conservation status of species globally. The IUCN red list of threatened species assess the conservation status of species globally. So it provides comprehensive database of species at risk and it guides conservation efforts. So it provides a comprehensive database. So this IUCN red list of threatened species, it provides the comprehensive database of species at risk and it will guide the conservation efforts. So the red list, it is used to identify priority species for conservation and monitor their population trends. So the red list, it is used to identify priority species for conservation and monitor their population trends. So these are some case studies about conservation of biodiversity. So first one is Great Barrier Reef. The Barrier Reef, it is the world's largest coral reef system. So and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is a Great Barrier Reef. It is the world's largest coral reef. It is the world's largest coral reef system and it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So the climate change, pollution and coral bleaching pose significant threats to the reef's biodiversity. The climate change and also pollution and coral bleaching, this will pose significant threats to the reef's biodiversity. So the conservation efforts has taken include marine protected areas, water quality improvement and reducing climate changing impacts. So conservation efforts for coral Great Barrier Reef so include marine protected areas, water quality improvement and reducing climate change impacts. Second case study is Amazon rainforest. Amazon rainforest, it is the largest tropical rainforest and home to diverse species. Amazon rainforest, it is the largest tropical rainforest and it is home to diverse species. Deforestation for agriculture, mining and logging, it is a major threat to the Amazon biodiversity. Deforestation for agriculture, mining and logging, it is a major threat to the biodiversity of Amazon forest. So conservation initiatives, these will focus on establishing protected areas, sustainable land use practices and indigenous rights. So conservation initiatives focus on establishing protected areas, sustainable land use practices and also indigenous rights. So by using these strategies, we can conserve the Amazon rainforest biodiversity. So what are the benefits of biodiversity conservation? So biodiversity conservation, this supports sustainable development by ensuring the availability of natural resources. Biodiversity conservation supports sustainable development by ensuring the availability of natural resources. So this will preserving the biodiversity maintains ecological balance, which is essential for the health and resilience of our ecosystem. So preserving biodiversity, it maintains ecological balance. So preserving biodiversity, it maintains ecological balance and which is essential for the health and also resilience of our ecosystem. Conservation of biodiversity contributes to climate change mitigation and adaptation by preserving carbon sinks and regulating local climates. Conservation of biodiversity contributes to climate change. Conservation of biodiversity, it contributes to the climate change mitigation, adaptation by preserving carbon sinks and also regulating local communities. So local climates. So these are the benefits of biodiversity conservation. So what are the challenges in biodiversity conservation? So lack of funding and resources pose significant challenges to biodiversity conservation efforts. So lack of funding and also resources poses significant challenges to biodiversity conservation efforts. Balancing conservation priorities with human development needs, this can be complex and it requires careful planning. Balancing conservation priorities with human development needs, this can be complex and it requires careful planning. And also global coordination and political will are necessary to address biodiversity loss on large scale. Global coordination and political will are necessary to address biodiversity loss on a large scale. So these are the challenges in biodiversity conservation. So coming to the conclusion, Conservation biodiversity, it is essential for maintaining the health and resilience of our ecosystem. So it is used for the maintenance of ecological balance and the protecting biodiversity. It preserves ecosystem services and it supports sustainable development and benefits human societies. The protecting biodiversity, it preserves ecosystem services, supports sustainable development and it benefits human societies. Each individual can contribute to biodiversity conservation through sustainable choices, education, and supporting local conservation initiatives. Each and every individual, they can contribute to biodiversity conservation through sustainable choices, education, and supporting local conservation initiatives. So this is about threats and conservation of strategies of biodiversity. And thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.